very pleasant good evening to our viewing and listening audience, and welcome to another session of HealthWise. This is a collaborative venture between the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association and Your Nation Station. What's up? Are you starting over?
Dr. Blake's General Dentistry and Orthodontics, located on South Independence Square Street in Basseterre, is the place to discover that perfect smile you have always dreamt of. With convenient hours to serve you, Dr. Blake's Dental assures the best preventative and restorative care to guarantee the health and beauty of your smile. Call 466-7622 for your appointments.
Once again, a very pleasant good evening to our viewing and listening audience, and welcome once more to another presentation of HealthWise, a collaborative venture between the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association and Your Nation Station, ZIZ Television. Our aim is to bring information and education to our people on selected health topics which have been appropriately chosen, and for whom and for which we have selected members of our profession who are willing to volunteer their time and effort in educating our population and spreading that vital information that will help to make us health wiser. Tonight, we have a very interesting topic to delve into. It's a topic which I'm sure many people would have heard about on many occasions, but would not be clear as to what this foreign word lupus is all about. Well, to help me dig and delve into this topic and to explain the ins and outs of the word or the disease lupus, I have with me none other than specialist in internal medicine, Dr. Terence Drew. Dr. Drew, good evening.
Good evening, Lachlan. Well, thank you very much for having me here this evening to discuss this most important issue, topic, medical concern, medical ailment, so that our people here in St. Kitts and Nevis would have a much better understanding of what lupus is, and with that knowledge, and as is said, knowledge is half the battle, and so the other half will be to do something about it. And so I'm happy that I'm here and I look forward to discussing this topic with you and with the general public of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay, thank you very much for that intro. Of course, at some stage during our presentation, we will have some breaks. We will ask the members of the public to call in and give us your questions, your concerns. Ask us, about issues which might not be clear, so that we can try and make the topic lupus pellucidly clear at the end of this program. Now, Dr. Drew, can you give me a simple enough definition of lupus? What is that?
Well, lupus is an autoimmune disease that, affects the body, and it tends to affects women, during the childbearing age much more. So it's an autoimmune disease. What does that mean? An autoimmune disease means, just if somebody were to imagine that we have a country, and imagine for a moment that the body is the country, and that country has an army. I mean, we are here right next to the army barracks, and whose function really is and responsibility is to defend and protect the country from any outside invaders. But imagine for a moment that the defense force were to turn against the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. That is what we call autoimmune. It's like the body has an immune system that is to defend it against outside invaders, but also inside bad actors, like cells that would become cancer cells and so forth. And for some reason, these cells that we call antibodies, the body's immune system, start to attack the body itself. And that is why we say it's autoimmune. It's your immune system that is attacking its own body, that it is supposed to be defending. Okay. And that is the crux of the matter with lupus.
Okay, you spoke about the immune system. Mm-hmm. What exactly is this immune system that is often spoken about? I know as a result of the pandemic, the coronavirus, the term immune system came to the fore. And I think we should try and clarify for our listening and viewing audience, what is this immune system?
Well, the immune system is really the system that is responsible for defending the body against infection. For example, just like the coronavirus, you get infected, your body will mount an attack against the coronavirus in an effort to kill it. That is the immune system's job. For example, if you get some sort of bacterial infection, a parasite in your system, the immune system is really set up to protect and to kill all those type of invaders, so to protect the body. Or even within your own body, if you were to develop bad cells, like cancer cells, for example, your immune system would attack those cells and kill them. So the immune system is a defense mechanism, a system of defense to defend the body from bad things, both outside and within, mainly infections, bacteria, viruses, these type of things.
Okay, you referred to lupus as an autoimmune disease. You have any other examples of autoimmune disease that you may just mention at this time, or is it lupus is a standalone disease of that class?
Well, of course not. There are many autoimmune diseases around. And lupus is the one that I think we are most familiar with here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but there are others that even mimic lupus, such as we have a rheumatoid arthritis, and people know what is rheumatoid arthritis. Is a disease that really causes deformities of the hands and so forth. It has its subtleties and can present in different ways, but that is what people most likely would know. We also have one called Sjogren's syndrome, where it affects the salivary gland. Like, when people get mumps, the gland for the mumps right below the ear can become swollen, and the salivary glands are the glands that produce your sputum and so forth, or and those can be can be affected. We have a whole other range of autoimmune disease that can affect the brain, can affect the lung in their own right. So rheumatoid arthritis here in St. Kitts and Nevis, I see lupus a lot, rheumatoid arthritis a lot, and probably Sjogren's syndrome. And then there's the overlap syndrome, where all of these can come together in one big cook-up, to put it, and affect the body. So they can, I'm telling you, so they can do do that sort of thing. You have autoimmune disease that affect the muscles, that we call myositis. Autoimmune disease that affect the muscles and the skin, that we call dermatomyositis. And so the reason why I've mentioned this, and that was a pertinent question, is to show that there are there are range, a whole gamut of autoimmune diseases out there. So lupus is just one in a spectrum of autoimmune diseases. But I don't have the official statistics, and I'm hoping that we keep some. But if you were to ask me from my own practice, the most common autoimmune disease that I see here is lupus.
Well, the natural question, the natural follow-up question to all of what you would have said is how easy or how difficult is it to diagnose? Since, as you said, clearly some of the symptoms seem to mimic other diseases. So how easy, what are the challenges?
Very, very difficult sometimes to diagnose lupus. Lupus has many presentations. It can come in subtle ways. It can come in mild form, moderate forms. It can come in very severe forms. So to diagnose lupus sometimes takes more than one visit to the doctor. Sometimes it takes months, maybe years, because what one would recognize is that there is a criteria to there are some criteria to diagnose lupus. And, you know, those are based on the American College of Rheumatology and the European College of Rheumatism. And you have to meet, you know, a number of those criteria in order for you to be classified as lupus.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because, you know, in St. Kitts, in the Caribbean fact at large, many people think that when they have a problem, when they have some medical challenges, it's supposed to be diagnosed with one visit. You know, sometimes even with, they mention 2 or 3 things and the doctor is supposed to say, that is your diagnosis. Not realizing that some of the challenges and some of the overlaps which you clearly spoke about.
Yes. And doctors are not magicians, I would say. But I think that these diseases people have to understand, they're very, very complex. And not only in St. Kitts and Nevis, but anywhere you go in the world. And in order to properly diagnose somebody and to really pin it down, takes a lot of work. Not only brain power, but investigative work, such as, you know, lab tests and so forth, which are very expensive in order to reach a diagnosis. And so I want people to understand that sometimes I might say, doc, a patient might come and they might just have joint pain, and then you do a set of blood tests and you cannot pin down the criteria to really classify them as lupus. Then after they start with the joint pain, next year maybe, they start with a rash. And then you say, okay, 1 year ago you had the joint pain, this year you have the rash, now this test was negative, it's positive. And so all along you were developing lupus, and now you reach the criteria to say now that you have lupus. But there are some subtleties in all of that. But the key point is these diseases are difficult really to pin down and to diagnose.
My understanding is that, of course, no 2 cases are alike. So what sort of general symptoms can you underline here that can more or less start to point us in the direction of the possibility of something like lupus? What sort of symptoms would you say that somebody may mention?
Well, I would say that lupus attacks from the head down to the toe and everything in between. When you think about it. Because if we go from the head, we will quickly recognize that you can have hair loss. That is one of the symptoms. Now, if you leave there, you can come down, you can come to the eye. Lupus can cause inflammation in the eye. Even before you leave there, you can go into the brain. Lupus can affect the brain and cause psychosis. What is psychosis? Like, you know, what people commonly call that somebody might have lost his or her mind. Lupus can cause depression. And so when you see people with these type of diseases, you have to look for lupus, especially in our Caribbean, where we have a it's majority black people, and it affects young women and black women in a disproportionate way compared to other races. And then you come down to the nose, it can affect the nose. You come down to the mouth, it can cause oral ulcers. And if I come down further into the chest, it can affect the lungs, the heart. And if I go down further, it can affect the gut. And so what I want to show is that it can affect from the head all the way down to the toe. But what I see commonly here in St. Kitts and Nevis are, 1, the joints. Now this picture that we have here, you can see that there's a typical, what we call, that rash, that malar rash, almost like a butterfly rash. And if you look between the nose, just look off the nose, there's a clear spot in between there. Lupus typically presents like this if it affects the skin of the face and produce this type of rash, where that area between the nose is protected. It is thought that the nose provides some sort of cover of the underlying skin from the sun, because the sun exposure can really produce this type of rash. People come with joint pain and joint swelling. That is what I see a lot, the arthritis. Doc, my hands are swollen, my fingers are swollen. And that is when you have to differentiate it from the rheumatoid arthritis, because they are different. People can come with this rash. This rash sometimes a bit more difficult to see in darker skinned people. But if you were to look closely, you would recognize that this rash can exist in a number of persons. They might say, the sun, all of a sudden I'm going out in the sun and it's scorching my skin. It's like they become intolerant to the sun. And so they will seek medical care. Some of them come because they are tired. And they say, just tired, I just don't have any energy anymore. They might come for chest pain, problems breathing, skin rash apart from the face, or they might just have hair loss. So they tend to come with a variety of signs and symptoms. And as you said, no two cases are alike. There are no two cases alike. That means from the presentation, in terms of reaching a diagnosis, they are different. And when you reach a diagnosis and you have to, start a particular type of treatment, that in itself, patients respond differently. And that presents the difficulty sometimes in managing lupus. Some people, mild symptoms, you give them a certain type of tablet, maybe a painkiller or anti-inflammatory, and they are fine. And others, you have to throw everything at them, and still they will not. There are a certain number of persons, a subset of patients who will not respond to treatment even at that stage.
What about, let's look at the course of the disease now. I know, for example, if we take a condition like chickenpox, basically runs the same way almost in everybody, starting off with feverishness and then rash and so on, runs for a few days and it's over and done with. Is the course of lupus the same for everybody, or you have some cases which are slow onset, fast onset? What does it look like?
That's a very good question. The course is different in each patient that I've seen. And chickenpox, it doesn't necessarily cure, because it can give you shingles later on in life, but the course is different. At least it gives you a good number of years without any signs and symptoms for most people. But what I would say about lupus is that you have patients who present with just maybe joint pain, and then you treat them with, let's say, something like ibuprofen or Voltaren, and it solves, those medications solve their problem. And then there are other patients who come with joint pain, inflammation in the brain, where they get seizures and looking like they have meningitis or infection in the brain. Some come with fluid around the heart, fluid around the lungs. Some come with blood in the urine, kidney failure. They come dramatically presenting with a range of symptoms that those symptoms are dramatic, and the patient needs hospitalization. So you can go from those who just have joint pain, don't even take it as anything, to those who show up and need to be admitted to the ICU. And so you see a wide range. What I've found though in St. Kitts and Nevis is that men get lupus. I know I mentioned women in their childbearing age, but men get lupus. And from my experience, men who get lupus get it much more severely than women. That is from my personal experience. I see a lot of women, of course, with the whole gamut, but the men that I've diagnosed here, they have presented in dramatic, severe forms. Right?
So I'm getting from you that you have some cases which people, they have remissions, they have times when they improve and it appears as if the condition has gone into remission or has disappeared. Is that the case?
Yes, for some people it is like that they can have joint pain, feel bad, you treat them, and then it's almost as if they are cured. And some patients will actually think that they are cured from their disease. until the disease can present itself again. Sometimes it can present itself in a more dramatic and severe form. And then there are others who get it and they just go straight downhill with all the complications and so forth, end up in the ICU, become debilitated, and never truly recover or regain the health as previous.
Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to take a short break for station identification, during which time, of course, we will re-energize and we will be right back, to continue our discussion on this very important topic of lupus. So, after a short break, we'll be right back.
Dr. Blake's General Dentistry and Orthodontics, located on South Independence Square Street in Basseterre, is the place to discover that perfect smile you have always dreamt of. With convenient hours to serve you, Dr. Blake's Dental assures the best preventative and restorative care to guarantee the health and beauty of your smile. Call 466-7622 for your appointments.
Here to inform the visiting delegates.
We're here at the Ocean Terrace in
ZIZ Evening Newscast, weekdays at 7 p.m. Whether you're at home or abroad, ZIZ's social media platforms help you stay connected with what's going on in St. Kitts and Nevis. Keep up with daily events by liking our Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter at ZBC Online. Like our pictures on Instagram and subscribe to our videos on YouTube. Also, you can watch us live on the ZIZ mobile app and our website, zizonline.com. No matter where you are, ZIZ is just a click away. ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation, reaching you wherever you are.
Welcome back to HealthWise, our medical program that is organized by the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association in collaboration with your nation's station, ZIZ Television. And tonight, our topic is lupus. What is that? And we have in studio with me to expound on the topic, Dr. Terence Drew, specialist in internal medicine. We have started so far, we've looked initially at what lupus really is, and now we're about to attack the causes. What, Dr. Drew, what causes have been underlined to date in relation to this condition?
Well, to pin down a cause for lupus has been really difficult, and researchers are still looking for that, that cause. However, enough information is there to suggest that there's a genetic basis for it. And yet, even persons who might have the genes associated with lupus, they still have a small chance of developing lupus. However, we do know that there are things that contribute significantly, such as the environment. Sunlight is thought to be one. Stress, smoking, certain medicines, certain viruses and infections, of course, can trigger the immune system in a way that the immune system attacks the body. Hormonal changes, and that is why it is thought, such as estrogen, and that is why it is thought that this is the reason why women of childbearing age are those who are more susceptible to develop lupus. And even problems with the immune system that are still being studied to determine how that might bring about lupus. So if we look at it carefully, you'll recognize that a lot of these triggers with somebody with the genetic basis for developing lupus, the young woman is most likely. And if it's a sunlight, and if you live in the Caribbean, exposed to the sunlight with the genetic predisposition, then one can easily understand why somebody can develop lupus. And these viruses are implicated in a lot of immune diseases. You know, they come into the body responds to them, and somehow the immune system start to behave in abnormal ways, and these antibodies and so forth start attacking the body.
You see, my concern, and I'm sure the concern of lots of our viewers and listeners, is that we live in the sun. You know, and if the sun is going to be a potential cause or contributing significantly to the development of lupus, should we work in the night and sleep during the day?
Well, that would be a very difficult one to answer. But I think that if people use common sense measures to prevent, you know, the direct sunlight from hitting them for too long and to be too exposed. However, sunlight is important, I must admit. However, we know that, you know, being exposed to intense sunlight and so forth, especially during the peak times like midday and so forth. But one of the things with the affectation of the ozone layer and the entry of more UV rays, one has to ask if this will contribute to an increase in lupus. That is an interesting, you know, thought, and of course, that based on what is a contributing factor, that is something that can definitely be looked at. So, is climate change going to contribute to the development of more lupus? So that is why we have to keep our eyes on climate change and how it can affect the health of our people, not just in St. Kitts, but around the world, of course.
And we know the climate change issue is a hot topic now all around the world.
Yes.
You know, some on one side, some on the other side. Now, risk factors. With many medical conditions, there's certain risk factors that would, in their presence, put yourself at a higher chance of having this particular condition. As it relates to lupus, any specific risk factors you want to comment on?
Well, there are the modifiable ones and non-modifiable ones. And the non-modifiable ones are the being female and being of the childbearing age. Those two things are very difficult to change. And also, if you have a family member with lupus or some other, you know, autoimmune disease, that you would be at risk, especially if it is a very close relative of yours, like mother to child, you know, sisters, and so forth. They have an increased chance of getting the lupus, and those are non-modifiable. You can't change who your mother is. You can't change your sex. Well, I might not. Well, you cannot change the genetics of your sex. Right? Let's say that. And your age, you can't change your age, and so forth. And so those are the non-modifiable. But then there are the modifiable ones, such as how much are you smoking? That is an interesting one. Are you leading a healthy lifestyle in general? Are you protecting yourself from certain forms of infections and so forth? These things, as I mentioned before, those that contribute to development of lupus, some of them are actually the risk factors for persons to develop lupus. For example, if you had a mother has a child who is born with lupus, that mother is at risk for developing lupus.
Wow.
Right. So, and what I see a lot of patients might start out with one type of immune disease and end up with another type, and there's a mix, or you might classify it as one and then later on. So having some sort of autoimmune disease seems like you're at risk for other autoimmune diseases. And so these things can really be risk factors. But the thing with lupus is, at the end of the day, that genetic predisposition and the non-modifiable contributors to development of lupus really makes it very difficult to say, okay, I'm going to put a program in place to prevent lupus. Like you can put a program in place to prevent hypertension and diabetes and obesity and so forth. smoking. But to put a program in place to say we are going to prevent lupus, that is extremely challenging to do.
I'm going to throw a curveball right now, and it's a curveball which will ultimately even affect myself, and that is the race card.
Yes.
You know, what we have noticed in the past when we've discussed a variety of topics is that the black race, the African American race, always seems to be on the top rung when it comes to being at risk for coming down with these conditions. Is that the case with lupus?
Yeah, that is also the case with lupus. That it,
you know, I was hoping you would say no.
Well, you know, there are different diseases that affect different populations. But as you said, but disproportionately, lupus affects the black women, and it affects them in the peak of their life, when they would be should be most healthy and so forth, during the childbearing years, when they should be talking about and thinking about having children, that this is a time that when they are struck with this disease. And so it disproportionately, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of severity. Black women are seen to get the most severe form of lupus. And so black women here think it's a nevus, the majority of the population is that, and they're at high risk, so to speak. And so the race card is very, very important. And I think that is why you chose a topic like this to speak about tonight. In my own practice, I have a number of lupus patients, and I see patients all the time.
The female thing is standing out.
The female thing is standing out. For me, it is almost like a 4-to-1 ratio right now. From my own practice, a 4-to-1 ratio in terms of male to female.
That is significant, admittedly. You know, from my observation and interaction with people, you know, many people always express these concerns in relation to race and disease, and it always, in most cases, you know, that always pops up. African American race at higher risk. African American race at high risk for cardiovascular diseases, and now we're talking about lupus, and this is the case here. You know, I would hope one of these nights that we would have a discussion on some topic where, you know, we would not be at increased risk. You know, maybe the risk of becoming rich overnight. You know, I wonder if we do it at higher risk.
Well, there are many diseases like osteoporosis. You know, that is not even a main problem for us here. You know.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So there are some diseases that we are spared from. Really, you know.
All right, let's look at some complications of lupus, because you know you clearly stated in your intro that lupus can affect you from your head down to your toes, and no doubt it would have some impact on various parts of the body. What sort of complications you can be looking at if you look at various organ systems?
Right. So if we start from top, come down, the brain, we can have psychiatric, you know, complications. I mean, people can present almost like they're having schizophrenia or something like that. You can have people present with lupus with severe depression. You know, that can be another complication of it. Now, when we come down more, we come into the chest, this is where it gets very interesting. I've seen people with inflammation around their heart and fluid around the heart. So, you know, it can cause something, you know, we call it pericarditis. And it can even lead to what we call constrictive pericarditis, where the sac around the heart becomes inflamed and prevents the heart from actually beating how it should, and therefore it cannot function, and the person can have, you know, those heart issues. Lupus can cause inflammation in the blood vessels in the brain, in the heart, even in the kidneys. So it can cause strokes, it can cause heart attack, and it can cause kidney failure. Within the lungs itself, or the chest itself, it can also affect the lungs, where you can have what they call pleural effusion, fluid around the lung. And apart from that, it can affect the tissue of the lung, or the substance of the lung, and cause inflammation of the lung. And as a result, the lung will not function as it should. And then, but one of the most affected organs in the body, the kidneys. The kidneys. When you're diagnosing lupus, all the patient can show up with is lupus nephritis. What does that mean? Inflammation of the kidneys as a result of lupus. That might be the only thing. No skin, no joint, just the kidneys alone. And that can diagnose. If you do a biopsy, you can diagnose it. So therefore, the kidneys themselves can be affected and can lead to kidney failure. So we oftentimes see kidney failure in patients who suffer from lupus. Those are some of the dramatic complications that you can have from lupus.
Okay, going back to your experiences now, in terms of the patients you see with lupus, what's the most commonly presenting symptom that is suggestive of maybe this person is lupus? Is it a kidney presentation? Is it a lung? Is it a heart? The most standout one?
Joint pain.
Joint pain.
Yeah. They show up and they say, my joints are hurting me and I didn't do anything, I didn't hit them, and sometimes they swell in the morning. Joint pain is one of the number one things, or pain in general.
Is this multiple joints? Is it single joints? Is it symmetrical?
Well, they can affect multiple joints. Generally, I see multiple joints. We affect the joints of the hands, but it can affect almost any other joint in the body. So you can see multiple joints of the hand that the patient presents with, and this is where you want to differentiate it from rheumatoid arthritis. But you see a young woman with joint pain coming to the doctor, seeking help. Lupus has to be one of the diseases that you must consider.
Okay, we're going to take another break for station identification again, and when we come back, we will be entertaining any calls with any questions as it relates to lupus. We have Dr. Drew on hand, and we will attempt to give some clarity to any concerns, any questions for persons who would love to join the discussion. The numbers to call will be shortly placed on the screen. 466-2666. You have 662-8674. You have 767-4765. And for those overseas callers, you have 239-645-4500. And so when we come back, our discussion will continue with lupus. We'll be right back.
Dr. Blake's General Dentistry and Orthodontics, located on South Independence Square Street in Basseterre, is the place to discover that perfect smile you have always dreamt of. With convenient hours to serve you, Dr. Blake's Dental assures the best preventative and restorative care to guarantee the health and beauty of your smile. Call 466-7622 for your appointments.
Here to inform the visiting delegates.
We're here at the Ocean Terrace in
ZIZ Evening Newscast, weekdays at 7 p.m.
Okay, welcome back to HealthWise, our program usually organized by the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association in collaboration with your nation station, ZIZ Television, during which time we try to educate and inform our general public about medical topics of interest, and at the same time we try to educate and make people health wiser. Tonight, we are on the topic of lupus, and with me in studio is Dr. Terence Drew, who is addressing the topic, and we are at the stage of looking at some of the complications that one can face as a result of being diagnosed with this particular malady. Dr. Drew, what other complications can we notice with?
Right. So I've mentioned some of them before. The blood ones we did not touch on, but the blood clots. Many occasions, patients might come to you with a blood clot, a DVT, whether it's in the leg or, that can travel up to the lung, cause a pulmonary embolism. That's a clot in the lung. Or some of them might have what you call paradoxical clots. However, all those, especially those who are in the childbearing age, they should be tested for lupus and a syndrome that we call antiphospholipid syndrome. Antiphospholipid syndrome is a syndrome that predisposes a person to have clots, and therefore they must be screened for that. Not only that, they can have other immune issues where the immune system becomes weak, and therefore they are more prone to get infections, and that is a serious, serious issue. When they get infections, they can get them. They are more prone to them, and they can get them really, really bad. So those blood ones must be looked out for. And you were mentioning, asked about how do patients present here. I did not mention it before, but it is important to note that patient can present with blood clots. That might be the first presentation of lupus.
That's
Another presentation can be a woman who is trying to conceive and would have had multiple miscarriages. And when you study her, she might have antiphospholipid syndrome, which is caused by lupus. So then again, sometimes you see women who would have had multiple miscarriages. Lupus is one of those diseases that must be investigated for. And so those extend the gamut really of the complications that persons can have from lupus. But that's the physical, the psychological, depression is very associated with lupus, even if lupus is not the cause directly of the depression. Just having to deal with this chronic disease really cause a lot of anxiety and depression in persons who suffer from lupus.
Especially when it's mentioned that there's no cure.
Yes.
That we're fighting an uphill battle, basically.
Yes. It's very, very difficult to deal with.
Now, the diagnostics. It is said that, you said it earlier in your presentation, the difficulties, the challenges that one can face when it comes to getting a diagnosis. Take me through it. Take me through, what you're doing.
So what really happens, the patient comes to the office, and as I always say, that a good history, talking to the patient, listening to the patient. If doctors were to listen and examine, you would need less lab tests, or it can really lead you to do the correct tests to find out exactly what is happening. So nothing beats a good patient interview and a good physical exam. These techniques or modalities would have been around for hundreds of years, and to this date I still think that they're the cornerstone for medical practice. So that is where you start. So the patient comes, he or she presents their symptoms, and you look for the signs, of course, and that can lead you. So you're expecting them to come with the joint pain, the skin rash, the tiredness, the brain fog, the chest pain, shortness of breath, those type of things.
I'm glad you underscored the importance of the medical history, because, as I said earlier, many people think that the doctors can wave a magic wand and make that diagnosis. And so when you start to ask questions in relation to the head and then perhaps relation to the foot, you still have that small percentage of people, where you going with a question? What you want on my business? I telling me head hurting me. Not realizing, of course, that the headache that they may be presenting with may be in some way linked to the pain in the calf or the pain in the abdomen. So I'm glad you underscored that important point. Sorry for interrupting.
No problem. That's a very good intervention. And in that way, you can start. Now, once you would have collated that information and, take into account their history and the signs and symptoms, now you start thinking that this might be an autoimmune disease. And I mentioned the whole spectrum of autoimmune diseases, and looking at the epidemiology, you might say, boy, lupus is common in St. Kitts, let's see where this is going. Because that has to be a part of something. You must think of it. If you don't think of lupus, you're not going to diagnose it, because it's sometimes very difficult to diagnose if it does not present in its dramatic form. And even when it presents there, sometimes still, if you don't think of it, you cannot diagnose it. And so once you would have put that together, the next step now is to get the relevant lab tests. And the tests, I must say, are expensive. There are some of the sophisticated tests, and they're expensive. And so you can start with the common ones because they are very important.
Before we go on to the lab test, I just want to remind the general public that this topic, lupus, we're glad to present it tonight. And if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, you can call 466-2666. That's the number here. You also can use 662-8674. You can also call 767-4765. And if there's an overseas caller interested in putting forward questions, concerns, suggestions, or recommendations, 1-239-645-4500. At this time, we're going to be looking at the tests, Dr. Drew. I know that you said a good medical history would lead you down the correct path. Then, obviously, you would need to be able to substantiate the thoughts that are in your mind now with some tests.
Yes.
What sort of tests are we looking at here now?
Well, we can start with the most common tests that we do routinely. We can get what you call a CBC. Called a CBC, which is the blood counts, can give you a good idea. For example, the cell counts can be low, you know. They can be low. In lupus, you can see that. And so therefore, that gives you an idea. If there's an infection, you might have them normal or a little bit elevated. So that is important to know that. So the white blood cell count will be low, the platelets can be low. And then also you can do what is called the set weight to see. The set weight gives you an idea if there's inflammation within there, and the set weight can be elevated. And so you can get that here at JNF on the CBC forms. And then the other one is the chemistry, to test the chemistry.
Before you go on, you know, the SED rate, the ESR as it's called. When I was in medical school many moons ago, the thinking was if you have a very high SED rate, you could be possibly looking at a connective tissue disorder. But let's take a break and entertain our first caller. Good evening, caller. You're on.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening. We're hearing you.
Are you hearing me, doctor?
Yes.
Yes. Can you turn your television down and speak to the phone?
Sure. May I speak with the doctor? May I ask a question to Dr. Drew? Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes, doctor. I tune in rather late. So there are two questions. What is it? It is really lupus. And the next question is, can
the phone move away from your television and speak to the phone?
Yes, I've moved away from it.
Yes.
And Dr. Joe was saying that I tune in rather late. I have two questions to ask. What is lupus really? That's number one. And the next question is, can the male also get lupus? Because I heard you refer to women during pregnancy. That can a male also get lupus?
Of course, males can get lupus, and they do get lupus. I think there are some celebrities, and I think we have some photos. Yes.
If you have any more questions, so we can take the questions.
Right.
Dr. Drew can address them.
Yes, but males do get lupus, even in a ratio of 4-to-1 that I see in my own practice. Much less than females, but they do get lupus, yes.
Okay, yes. And what is it really? What is lupus? I didn't get the original answer when you got the tuning rather late.
Through all your questions so that we can free up the line, and Dr. Drew will answer, all your concerns. So you have any other questions?
No, thank you, doctor.
Okay, thanks much for your call.
And he asks if males get lupus. Yes, males do get lupus. And from my experience, when males get lupus, it is more severe than when women get it. That was one of the questions. And the other question is, he wanted a clarification. Well, in simple terms, we consider lupus an autoimmune disease, which means the body has a defense system that is supposed to fight infections and cancer cells and so forth. When that immune system attacks the body that it is supposed to defend, we call it an autoimmune disease. So it's an autoimmune disease that affects the body.
Yes, good evening, caller. Are you on? Okay, I think we would have missed that one.
Okay.
All right. And the caller did ask about males, and we did have on screen a while ago a famous male,
Yes.
a very famous male. If it can be put on the screen again, so it can be shown that famous males.
I'm sure a lot of people probably see him,
Exactly.
and was wondering what happens to his skin. He has something called discoid lupus. So that is a lupus. It may not be systemic where it affects the whole body like the lungs and so forth, but it affects the skin dramatically, of course, and you can see almost like he would have had burns in his skin, and these are the scars after having burned. But this is, so when you see Seal again, I'm sure you would understand why his face does look like that. But some of these patients who have this type of lupus that is called discoid lupus can develop the systemic lupus, where it affects the brain, the lung, the kidneys, the heart, and so forth. And so males can be affected.
Okay, but we were discussing laboratory tests.
Right. So with the labs now, so we can start, we talk about the CBC, we can talk about the chemistry.
No, actually,
Yes.
I remember. I was going to talk about the set rate.
Yeah, the set rate.
Yeah. Like I did say back then, the thinking was a high SED rate. As a matter of fact, it was referred to as a triple figure SED rate is highly suggestive of a very small group of disorders.
Yes.
And in that small group, there were connective tissue disorders.
Yes.
Of course, you had cancers and you had HIV, AIDS, and so on. But that's still up to you now?
Well, just, to a large extent, still obtained, because, you know, when you see a set rate that is above 100, as you say, there are a small number of diseases that really cause the set rate to go. And connective tissue diseases are among those diseases that can cause a set rate to go that high. And so that is important. So a set rate is important not only for diagnosis, but also for follow-up. And we can discuss that a little bit later. But now you can get to the crux of the matter also with the chemistry. And the chemistry really is where you test the kidneys. And, you know, when you do that kidney test, where you look at the creatinine, we call it, that can be elevated. Why? Because lupus, we know, affect the kidneys. And so that is one of the things you can look at dramatically there. Does it affect the liver in a dramatic way? Not necessarily. But lupus, in my estimation, can inflame almost any organ, but not necessarily affecting it. Does it affect the cholesterol? Does it affect the cardiac enzymes a lot? If you're having a heart attack, maybe it can. If it can cause inflammation, yes, it can. But in that chemistry, the one to really keep an eye on is the renal. And then you can do a urinalysis, which is you go and you urinate. And in the urinalysis, you can see blood in the urine or protein in the urine. And those can help you really to lead to a diagnosis of lupus. And now, apart from those routine labs, there are some specialized tests that have to be done. And they're expensive. They're expensive. To do a good workup for an autoimmune disease, such as lupus or any in that group, is an expensive undertaking.
Be prepared to spend.
Be prepared to spend. And sometimes when I do a full workup and give the patient and they make a call and they see they're spending upward of $500, $700, they get a point there. You know, then some would ask, can we cut down? But then I say, we really have to do a proper analysis and assessment. It's hard to really exclude any of these, because based on your symptomology, I want to see which autoimmune disease you have, if you have any at all. So you don't want to be left with any doubt that you send for a test and it comes back. However, in lupus, there's one called the ANA. Now, the European College of Rheumatism is now saying that you must have an ANA in order for you to diagnose lupus. But we know that the ANA negative lupus. Why does that happen? Maybe because of the technique of the lab, or maybe because of, you know, that they did not pick up the ANA as they should. However, they can have the other types positive, such as the double-stranded DNA the anti-Smith. These are fancy words to say that these are antibodies really that your body is making. Remember those cells we talk about that are responsible for fighting the infections and fighting the cancer cells, but instead they start to fight the own body. These cells are the cells that we look for, these type of immune cells. So we call them the ANA, the double-stranded DNA, the anti-Smith, you know, and then there's a whole, you know, the rheumatoid factor and so forth. There's a whole set of them. But the bottom line is with these tests are specialized tests and they are expensive. But they're important to do in order for you to reach a diagnosis for lupus. And therefore, I would say that in that case, the patient has to look forward to spending some money.
And of course, one of the confusing issues that may arise is that not every positive ANA means lupus.
Exactly.
And so therefore you still have to underscore the importance of doing everything so you can be sure.
Yes.
The treatment is serious.
Yes.
Obviously you want to be sure before you initiate some form of treatment.
And as we said before, that the diagnosis of lupus is sophisticated and it's complex. And to give somebody a diagnosis of lupus, you know, you want to be sure. So you want to make sure that you would have done all the necessary testing and that you're sure. However, with the ANA test, if you see somebody with a positive ANA and maybe have some joint pain, they may not fit the full criteria to say lupus. But there are other, you know, this is a spectrum now. Lupus has become a spectrum. Probable lupus, possibly lupus, you know, and undifferentiated autoimmune diseases where you can't pin down the person with any of these autoimmune diseases according to criteria that are used to diagnose diseases. However, you see the patient with an elevated ESR, they have maybe a positive ANA and maybe just joint pain, and they don't fit the criteria of anything. And so you now have to find a way to classify these persons because some of them can go on, of course, to develop systemic lupus. And that is the point there.
Okay, we're going to take our last break now for station identification. And when we come back, we will continue along the line of discussing lupus. And we will also entertain your calls, questions, suggestions, recommendations on the numbers available on your screen, 466-2666. 662-8674, 767-4765, and for overseas interests, 1-239-645-4500. We will be right back.
Dr. Blake's General Dentistry and Orthodontics, located on South Independence Square Street in Basseterre, is the place to discover that perfect smile you have always dreamt of. With convenient hours to serve you, Dr. Blake's Dental assures the best preventative and restorative care to guarantee the health and beauty of your smile. Call 466-7622 for your appointments.
Here to inform the visiting delegates.
We're here at the Ocean Terrace in
ZIZ Evening Newscast, weekdays at 7 p.m.
Okay, welcome back to HealthWise, the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical Association, the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association's program, where we try to inform and educate our population on various health topics. And tonight, we're doing no different. we're discussing lupus. And we have Dr. Terence Drew on hand. And we've been looking at the various aspects of lupus, the diagnosis, the various tests that can be done. Dr. Drew, any role for imaging studies in the diagnosis of lupus? So far we've spoken about other laboratory chemical tests and so on. Imaging studies, any role for those?
Well, if there is a certain type of complication that you're looking at, for example, the lung, you can do a CT scan of the lung, and X-ray, you can start with an X-ray, and you can look to see if there's fluid around the lung. You can also do a CT scan and look at the tissue of the lung and see if there is any inflammation in the lung. That can help sometimes. Even with the brain, if you can get an MRI of the brain, if there are any manifestations, then you can see that there might be inflammation in the brain. But in terms of diagnosis, to have an image to diagnose lupus, it is not.
Yeah, we'll take a break now to entertain our caller. Caller, you're on.
Good night, Dr. Chu. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
I have one question. Do you have for a diet? Because then I was diagnosed with lupus about a year ago, and also what gives me most flare up is like when I eat a lot of starch. If I eat bread, if I drink alcohol, it goes straight to the joint with a lot of pain. Do they have a diet plan that what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat?
Right. So the diet is quite important, and I try to ask patients to eat as healthy as possible and to limit as much as possible processed foods, because I found that processed foods tend to give patients more lupus symptoms. And I think it's right. Go ahead.
No, sorry.
Right. I was speaking about the processed foods, and those processed foods tend to give patients a great deal more of symptoms. I also encourage them to live an otherwise healthy life and to eat properly. Now, what I've done with a number of patients is that there is an anti-inflammatory type of diet, a diet that really helps to deal with the inflammation in the body, because lupus essentially is an inflammatory disease, which means it causes inflammation. Inflammation means, when you get hit too hard and your hand hurts you and you turn red and so forth, that is inflammation. But this inflammation is caused, of course, by the antibodies that we spoke about attacking the organs, and that inflammation can, really create a type of fire in the body that creates a lot of these symptoms that we have. So the diet is fundamental, and an anti-inflammatory diet can certainly help. And you have to also use your own judgment. Look at what causes you to flare. Look at what causes you to have, more symptoms. Because again, patients are different. For example, you would mention that when you eat the bread and so forth, that you would get a flare. For another patient, it might be something else. But to have a general diet that is, very natural and wholesome and really void of a lot of processed foods, I have found really to help a number of patients.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, caller. Thank you, caller, for your intervention. That's an important point, and I'm glad, how you addressed it, because obviously what is good for Peter may not be good for Paul. And so, she has found from her observation that certain foods are aggravating her condition.
Yes.
And obviously, she has hopefully taken the necessary action to address it.
Correct.
Okay, we were just looking at the imaging studies. You made some comments on imaging studies. The role of a biopsy in the diagnosis?
So if we look at the biopsy can help significantly, especially if you're dealing with the kidneys. But generally, you don't need a biopsy to diagnose lupus. But if somebody has suspected kidney disease as a result of lupus, or they have some kidney disease and they have blood or protein in the urine and a cause cannot be determined, that person really needs a biopsy of the kidneys. I remember that I might have had a number of patients who present with proteinuria, that's protein in the urine, or hematuria, that's blood in the urine. You might do an ultrasound to get an idea of what you're dealing with. Is there some sort of tumor, mass here, or anything else? Are the kidneys now becoming smaller? Are they larger? Is there some presenting disease that causing this? And they might need a biopsy of the kidney. So I think biopsies of the kidney, and I would have had to probably send them to Barbados, and I think another one that I sent to the States, because it's quite important. Somebody can just show up with protein in the urine, and that's a type of lupus affecting the kidneys. So in that sense also, it is important. And I think I spoke about the CT scans and the MRI, that they can help to identify complications and certain manifestations of lupus. So imaging has its role in dealing with the issue of lupus. The other issue is with the hand pain, because sometimes you say this patient having a lot of joint pain and joint swelling, and you want to nail down whether this is lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. And having an x-ray of the hand and looking at the characteristics of the damage of the joints can help you to determine, is this rheumatoid arthritis, is this lupus, because of the different ways in which they present on an x-ray when they affect the joints, especially of the hand.
You know, the term rheumatism is used loosely here in St. Kitts, very loosely, especially by elderly folk, elderly ladies. I would even go as far as to say, that he got rheumatism or she have rheumatism. Is there anything in that in relation to our lupus situations or rheumatoid arthritis situations that loose them? Well, what is your take from the people who say they have rheumatism?
Well, it's quite interesting. I think there might be a hunt to something, because for the Europeans, they say the European Society of Rheumatism, and the American, and they talk about rheumatoid, rheumatic diseases. So I think that is where it comes from. It comes there. But rheumatoid arthritis and lupus are two different diseases, two completely different diseases. And they present sometimes, they can be confusing initially, but rheumatoid arthritis affects the hands more in the sense that they cause deformities of the hand, whereas lupus does not normally cause deformities of the joints of the hand. So one is rheumatoid arthritis and one is lupus. Now, to say rheumatism, I think sometimes if somebody might have osteoarthritis, I may not use the term.
Any pain in the joint.
Any pain is a rheumatism. Well, but to be more sharply defined, I would prefer we keep it as osteoarthritis, which is a different type of mechanism to the joint swelling and joint pain that comes from lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and so forth.
And it's good that we make that distinction, because quite often people with the age-related arthritis, degenerative changes, they call it rheumatism.
Yes.
And it is important to underscore the fact that the word rheumatic refers to specific condition. Now, let's look at treatment, Dr. Drew. We have a wide variety of treatment options for lupus. And I'm sure when you touch on one, we're going to have some jokes because of the
what's happening now.
Exactly, because of what's happening up north.
Yes.
Our friends to the north. So let's look at treatment modalities. What's out there?
Well, with respect to the treatment, and the caller who called in earlier and spoke about when she eats starch, she realized she has more pain and so forth. So lifestyle changes. And treatment for any diseases at all, lifestyle changes are very, very important. I like to say the foundation of any treatment. And so I would say that, living a healthy lifestyle that we spoke about earlier.
We'll take a break right now to entertain our next caller. Good evening, caller. You're on.
Good evening, Dr. Joe.
Good evening.
If there is no cure for lupus, how can it be controlled?
Can you move away from your television and speak to the phone, please? We're getting a terrible feedback here. If you can move away from the television and you speak to your phone.
Yes, I'm saying, doctor.
Yes.
If there is no cure for lupus, how can it be controlled?
We're not quite understanding you. Can you repeat the question a little further away from your television? Turn your television down. Turn the volume down. Hello? Good evening.
This is what I'm saying, doctor.
Yes, go ahead.
If there's no cure for lupus, how come one can show it?
So he's asking about the cure for lupus. That is what I picked up.
Yeah, he said there's no cure for lupus, and the second part, I didn't quite catch the second part.
I didn't catch the second part either. But if he's asking if there's a cure for lupus, there's none. And if he's saying that, if he's making the statement, then he's correct. Yeah. Then he is correct in that sense. And that is a very good question that the caller just posed to us, or a very good statement, very important about whether it is curable or not. So far, it is not curable.
But with the treatment options, modalities that exist.
Right. You know? So I started out with lifestyle changes. And that means the diet, of course, eating well, getting exercise, resting when you have to rest, and be careful with the sun. The sun exposure, again, is very important because, for one, it can trigger a lot of the symptoms, and secondly, we know that it is also a trigger to develop the disease in any way. So those lifestyle changes are quite important, dealing with the depression, the anxiety. I can't overstate this enough because sometimes we might go straight to a tablet or go straight to this, and sometimes there are a lot more other situations in the person's life or the mental health that, you know, these situations have to be dealt with in order to really move on with the treatment. Because if a patient is depressed and anxious, they may not be compliant with even the medication that you would order.
So
and that is very important. Now, once we get to the medication aspect of it, and the doctor would have, you know, ordered some treatment, I want to ask the patient to, you know, comply with the treatment, and if there's any issue, to contact the doctor and not stop medication on their own. But one of the medication we can use, of course, hydroxychloroquine,
Yes.
Plaquenil. That is
where did I hear that before?
COVID. In the treatment for COVID, hydroxychloroquine is the foundational treatment. I have patients who are not from St. Kitts, of course, who come to see me from neighboring islands. And during the time when...
If we stick a pin right now, yes, and we entertain our next caller. Good evening, caller. You're with us.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
If you have if you lie down at night and you have crampness in your foot, what is the problem? You pick the toe.
You're lying down at night and you're having cramps in your foot?
Yeah. All the way down to the big toe.
All the way down to your toe?
Right, I mean...
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very vague question, you see. If you can be more precise with your question, because that comment you're making can happen in a number of conditions, even a bad sleeping position. So if you can be more precise with your question and we can try and address it. He's speaking about having some cramps in his legs down to his toes.
Yes. I want to say to that caller, of course, we are addressing lupus tonight, but his concern is very important, and it would be good if he really can get it addressed, you know, by his doctor. Mm-hmm. But as you said, there are a number of things that can cause his condition, and it's difficult to say what it is without getting more information on the history and a physical exam and so forth. Nonetheless, he called, which means he is really having some issues with that, and he should have it addressed as soon as he can see a doctor, a healthcare provider, and get it addressed. Mm-hmm. Thank you, caller, very much for calling in. With respect to the treatment that we were speaking about, hydroxychloroquine, Plaquenil, this is the foundational.
Is it important to underscore that is a friend of Mr. Trump?
Yes. Well, you know, he touted it early, but early even doctors, you know, some doctors thought that Plaquenil would really, you know, be a foundational treatment for COVID. As a matter of fact, just recently from Medscape, a journal that I subscribe to keep up to date with medical information, there was an article about Plaquenil and maybe the reintroduction of Plaquenil to treat patients with COVID in hospital.
I saw that article.
And I'm happy that you saw that article also. So you see, with COVID, things are still here and there because it's a new disease really that we are dealing with. Nonetheless, when COVID hit, I had patients who could not get Plaquenil. People start buying Plaquenil and guarding it at home when it hit. And even on the international level, I think the United States government would have bought a whole heap of Plaquenil and would have stored it.
And blocked the export.
Yeah, blocked the export. Yeah. And that affected international supply. So I had patients here who were saying, Dr. Drew, I can't get my hydroxychloroquine, I can't get my Plaquenil. And so, of course, the disease started to flare. And so I had to go back to prednisone and some other medication, whereas we know that hydroxychloroquine or Plaquenil really. So all lupus patients, unless that patient has some condition that makes it almost impossible to use Plaquenil, they should be on Plaquenil. All patients that I have, all of them are on Plaquenil. Now there are add-ons. The prednisone, of course, is used, and it can be used especially in the initial stages when you want to out that fire. Because lupus is like an it can present itself like a fire raging inside the body. And the prednisone is like you take water and you just throw it on the fire and just out it. Whereas Plaquenil,
potent anti-inflammatory.
Exactly. Potent anti-inflammatory to settle it down. Whereas Plaquenil will take time to really get going. However, over the course of time, it really deals to limit the complications, and it affects the course of the disease in a positive way. So we know that it affects flares in a positive way by decreasing the number of flares and decreasing the severity of flares. It helps to, the blood clots and so forth, it can help to decrease them and so. So Plaquenil hydroxychloroquine, which is the generic name, is the foundation when it comes to the treatment of lupus. The prednisone is very important. A lot of patients still have to stay on low-dose prednisone, but the Plaquenil, which helps to decrease the amount of prednisone that you need, because we know that prednisone causes a lot of significant and serious side effects in the body. Prednisone weakens the bones, affect the immune system, and blood pressure, diabetes.
Because we spoke about females being affected, in terms of numbers over males, and the change in the physical structure of women on steroids.
Right.
Of course, they will be concerned.
They are very concerned, because most women will say, look, I want to come off the steroid. I have a patient who has an undifferentiated disease, and I think eventually, I don't know, but that patient, each time she takes prednisone, even a small dose, she increases in weight, and that is a serious issue. That is because it can affect relationships and so forth, and so we have to be mindful of those things. But the prednisone and the Plaquenil, these are the foundation. But there are other types of medication we can use, like methotrexate and so forth. Those can be also used, and we can go on to more sophisticated treatment like the biologicals. The biologicals we don't have here. I don't think any drugstore sells biological here in St. Kitts and Nevis. I've asked because they are very expensive, but there are times when nothing else is really controlling the lupus, and you have to say, look, we need a biological in here. And what I do, maybe you might have to send the patient overseas and to see a rheumatologist or whatever, so that they can have access to those type of medication. But that is the hallmark. And then you have the NSAIDs. The NSAIDs which can help. The NSAIDs are like the ibuprofen, the Voltaren, the Piroxicam, the Naproxen. These type of medication are very common, especially the ibuprofen or the Motrin or the Advil, Naproxen. And they help with the disease, with the pain and the inflammation. However, they do not change the course of the disease. But they again have a lot of complications. Cardiovascular, heart complications, blood pressure complications, kidney complications. And so you don't want your patient to be on these medications for any extended period.
See, I can imagine you have to see in your practice, you would have to strike a balance between the cheap, readily available non-steroidals, the ibuprofen, etc. The middle of the road issues associated with the steroids, and the expensive biologics.
Yes.
You know, and that of course depends on the patient, the nature of the patient with whom you're, I guess, in contact with.
And that is exactly the point. That is exactly the point. And let me tell you, there's really an ethical and moral question here. When you see a patient sitting before you and you know that there is, you know, a better treatment or there are better options, and you just can't help that patient because there are financial constraints, meaning the patient can't afford it, that is sometimes difficult to deal with.
Very, very,
very difficult, because you see the patient in front of you, they have a chronic disease that is not curable, and they need, you know, enhanced treatment to really improve their quality of life. And you know that they can be helped, and really you can't help because the patient can't afford. And that sometimes is the difficulty in treating these type of diseases when patient can't afford. When it comes to the diabetes and depression and so forth, the medications are more common. They can be had at the health center and so forth. And we know that if patients follow a good diet and exercise, that they can actually deal to a great extent with controlling the hypertension and the diabetes and so forth. Lupus is a different kettle of fish, so to speak, in that you just don't know where this disease will go. You just don't know. And therefore, you want to be able to offer to the patient the best options possible. And so it is expensive, because if you look at the monthly cost of medication to handle disease, you realize if you have to do this, you're almost paying for a vehicle or half a mortgage for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And that is complicated.
Yeah, as we wind down, we have about 5 more minutes left on this program, and we still have a number of issues to touch. What I would like you to look at now is things in relation to lifestyle and home remedies. If there's anything out there, you know, as far as recommendations are concerned in relation to the lifestyle. Well, you did address the lifestyle to a certain extent. Any home treatments, any home remedies out there that...
Well, I've been looking for that, and I know there are a lot of things that would have been mentioned. But usually in medicine, and you know, you have to look to make sure that there are studies, double-blind studies, that are powered enough that you can trust them. I cannot say that I have seen any studies really to convince me that something, home remedy, might work. I mean, we spoke about the lifestyle changes, the exercise, those will work. But in terms of a substance, in terms of a bush, in terms of, you know, something.
Because you know people love bush.
Yeah. But I've reached my own conclusion with bush. I don't say they don't work or they do work. I'm neutral. Just like how I cannot say one way or the other until I see a study, I cannot say. The reason why I'm saying that, I just saw a study that came out on diabetes and cinnamon.
Exactly.
I don't know if you saw the study.
Yep. I've been following cinnamon for quite a while. I've been following cinnamon quite a while.
We have been following cinnamon, but a study just came out that really said that cinnamon can be used for pre-diabetes and help to manage it. So I'm saying that these type of things have taught me, whatever the remedy granny gives, just don't discard it like that.
Dig deep and examine it.
And examine it. And maybe if somebody were to do some study, we might reach the point where we might find some substance in what were claimed by our forefathers and so forth. So I don't disregard them at all, but I haven't seen any double-blind study powered enough to tell me that this, substance, this bush, this, merengue can work, or turmeric can work, or that can work. So I haven't seen those.
Okay, in the 3 minutes we have left, let us look at some myths. I call them lupus myths, which we can give a quick answer to.
Right.
1, lupus is contagious.
It is not contagious. It is a chronic disease, and it is not contagious. If someone has lupus, they will not pass it on to you.
Lupus is curable.
Lupus is not a curable disease. Once you are diagnosed with lupus, you will have it for the rest of your life.
Lupus is a kidney and joint disease only.
Lupus can affect almost any part of the body. As I said, from the top of your head all the way down to your toe and everything in between, even though there's a predilection for some organs and some systems, it can affect almost anything else. So it's not just kidney and joints.
Lupus can be diagnosed with one test.
Absolutely not. Just having a positive ANA does not diagnose lupus. You need, as I said, 4 criteria out of 11 that we use most frequently, and there are other type of methodologies to diagnosis. But just having a positive ANA or blood test is not a diagnosis for lupus.
The triggers for lupus are always known.
Absolutely not. Still, researchers are researching and researching to find and trying to pin down an exact or even a direct cause for lupus. But the triggers are not known, and that is why I said to people, listen to your body, observe, pay attention, because you might actually learn what's triggering you.
Well, thank you very much for those comments in relation to lupus, and I'm going to give you the last minute just to add some comments and reminders for the fact that we are in a pandemic right now, and we always want to remind people you have to do certain things to stay safe. So I give you the last words.
Right, so with respect to the COVID-19, the measures remain quite simple in terms of being able to carry out, in terms of washing your hands, having good hygiene, making sure that you practice good physical distancing, wearing a mask, because there are now notions that the COVID-19 might be airborne. Wearing a mask, and now people are discussing that you might need actually more than 6 feet. But having that social distance, wearing a mask, practicing good hygiene, I think those are the things that we really need to pay attention to in terms of preventing COVID-19. Let us not get relaxed, because we see what is happening in the United States, spike in almost all the states again. We see what's happening in Europe, spike again. Every time there's a relaxation of the measures, you will see cases, especially learning from what's taking place in Europe and what's taking place in the United States of America.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Drew, for tonight's presentation. We of the St. Kitts Nevis Medical and Dental Association had our normal Monday night program where we presented the topic lupus, and our tonight's guest was Dr. Terence Drew, specialist in internal medicine. We had a lovely discussion, and of course we will definitely be back here with another topic in another week. So you stay tuned, and if any suggestions, any comments, any questions, you can always call us, you can contact us, and we would willingly address it. So have a pleasant evening and an even better tomorrow. Good evening.